We are facing a century of new wars, and we will see a lot of blood. Probably a nuclear war in Europe, for example, or in the Middle East. It was very close in the Israeli-Iran war.
This was Patrick Baab, investigative journalist, political scientist, best-selling author, and one of the few voices in Europe right now with the guts to walk straight into the storm. Patrick pursues stories that cut against the grain, stories that challenge the official line instead of echoing the prevailing dogma, especially when it comes to Russia, China, and the machinery of war already shifting into high gear across both theaters. Now, if you're thinking, sure, but nuclear war in Europe, isn't that a bit alarmist? It's not, because what Baab and others are uncovering isn't speculation, it's trajectory. And if you're paying attention, it's not hard to see where this is heading. NATO posture, US doctrine, Pacific alliances, weapons transfers. This isn't diplomatic jockeying. It's structural preparation for confrontation. This is something that you really have to understand. In fact, the level of readiness across both the European and Indo-Pacific theaters is already far beyond what the public's been led to believe. And that's precisely why I've put together detailed executive briefings grounded in open source data, policy documents, and institutional shifts. The first, how unelected bureaucrats are steering Europe towards a confrontation with Russia and China. The second, more recent, Trump's 2025 blueprint for the coming war with China. It focuses on the return of the Indo-Pacific pivot and how this time it's not a balancing act. It's a deliberate tilt towards escalation. I will be discussing that report tomorrow with Malta's former Foreign Minister Evarist Bartolo. He was so kind to read the pre-release draft, and what you're seeing on your screen right now is his direct response. Now, to be completely transparent, these reports were initially written for senior execs in major tech and security firms. But I've also released a condensed, easier digestible version in video format for anyone who doesn't need the footnotes and forecasts, but wants the strategic picture. You can find all the links in the description. Back to Patrick Baab. What makes his story so compelling, at least for me, is that he didn't just report from a distance. He went in, on his own. He traveled to Russia, to Ukraine, into a live war zone. Not embedded, not insulated, no insurance, no funding. Just him, his recorder, and the risk. And he did it knowing full well what would follow. Professional censor, media hostility, political smear campaigns. And yet he did it anyway. That's not contrarianism, that's integrity. And while he was writing about the realities on the ground, the global situation was shifting. Not gradually, tectonically. The two great conflict zones, Europe and the Pacific, aren't just heating up in parallel, they're starting to interlock. Militarily, economically, narratively, because NATO is expanding into the Pacific. The renowned Russian thinker Dmitry Trenin wrote just 2 days ago that, and I quote, "World War III has already begun." While the Western public is shielded from this kind of information by simply blocking it, the rest of the world took notice, and Trenin's article is quoted around the globe. Latin American diplomats are quoting it. Southeast Asian analysts are debating it. Across the global south, people aren't asking if escalation is coming, they're trying to position themselves for what happens after. Meanwhile, in the West, we are being fed euphemisms and distractions. Deterrence, readiness, freedom of navigation. But if you look closely, it's all scaffolding for the same conclusion. Someone, somewhere decided we are going to war. And the rest of the machine is falling into place all around it. That's exactly why voices like Patrick's matter. Because while most of the media is busy manufacturing consent, your consent, he's one of the few still asking, wait, who benefits? Who gets burned? And who pays? I will leave you with something the former US Marine and anti-war activist Ken O'Keefe told me. It's blunt, but it cuts through the fog. If the message is all written on the wall, then read it. And Baab, he's one of those who are writing those messages on the walls, line by line. The question is whether we are willing to read them before the ink has been washed away with blood, probably with our blood. Patrick Baab, what a pleasure having you, and you're spending your Saturday morning with me. It's highly appreciated. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks very much for inviting me.
My pleasure. Patrick, you are one of a growing list of my speakers who have suffered personal consequences for speaking out. In your case, if I understood this correctly, and I'm looking at my notes here, you lost your position at the university in Berlin, right?
Well, it's a bit more complicated. I had two teaching assignments at a private university in Berlin, the Hochschule für Medien, Kommunikation und Wirtschaft, and a state-run university in Kiel, the Christian Albrechts Universität. So the teaching assignment at the University of Berlin was just signed. So I could press charges against the university, which was impossible at the university in Berlin because the teaching assignment was not already signed. And the background is just I did my job. I made investigations in the war zone in Donbass and on both sides of her front line. And so I showed up in German TV or German media as a poll watcher of Mr. Putin, which I was not. I just, well, came into Donbass during the referenda in fall 2022. And, well, I reported and I talked to people and I interviewed people at the polling stations. So I was seen over there, and the authorities asked me for joining a press conference, and I did because I'm a journalist and my job is to see and to talk about what I've seen. So I joined the press conference and I mentioned correctly that I'm a journalist and not a poll watcher, and that I'm investigating for a new book. So which was not mentioned in German public. So so we have two parts of the whole story. The first is inaccurate reporting because of ideology, incompetence, and ignorance. And the second part of the story is kicking me out of universities because of we want to align with the prevailing propaganda. And this is not a good way for universities. And both elements I mentioned show that the public space, the democratic debate space in Germany is completely broken down.
And not only in Germany. But before we dive in, so first of all, you spoke about the book, and well, first of all, I started reading one of your books. It's in regards to assassinations executed probably by the secret services in various European countries. That interests me because I'm doing some research. But the book you probably are referring to that caused you all these issues is a book called, loosely translated to English, On Both Sides. And that's indeed about your travels and reporting from both sides of the front in the Russian-Ukraine war. So that, if I understood this correctly, and I did a bit of research, that book was quite, how shall I say, well received, but also sparked quite some controversy and probably led to the issues that you have just described, right?
Yes, um, I got into this controversy before the book was published. So The mainstream media are aligning completely with NATO propaganda, and they try to press out everybody from the public space and the public debate space, the democratic debate space, who was on the ground, because reality should not come into the bubble of propaganda. That's the background. So today we have to speak of a Secret Service, media, digital political complex. And so, well, I did just my job. I was on both sides of the front line, aligning to the motto, to the method. Talk to both sides et audiatur altera pars in Latin, or also the other side has to be heard. And I did that. And well, I think the main thing in reporting, the first thing is not talking about something, it's listening to people. And in doing that, you have to go there. And you don't have to grab your information from computers and internet, because what you can see in the internet, in the computers, is only what secret services and upload filters allow. Nothing more. So you have to shut down your computer and you have to go there. You have to be on the ground and to talk to people. And this is something that I did. You cannot do that in a war zone just after the beginning of the war in starting your job. So you have to begin opening sources, finding sources before the trouble begins. And this is what I did. I'm covering Russia and Ukraine and these Eastern Europe countries for 25 years. So I had sources before the war started. And I tried to get in touch to those sources. And so I think I could open people, and they told me something which was not told to anybody else. And this is part of the story. I was on the way with smugglers, with right wingers, and with farmers, and all those guys, with drivers, with soldiers, because partly I know those guys. I knew those guys in the time before.
I should have said it at the beginning, actually. So you're a seasoned journalist. You are, I think, 40 years in journalism, if I saw this correctly, and you worked for quite a number of well-known German broadcasters. If I find it now, help me out here. So you were
So
working
I
lecturer.
started my
I found it, ja.
yeah.
Saarländischer Rundfunk, Hessischer Rundfunk, North German Broadcasting, NDR, which is quite a well-known, etc., etc. So you spent your time, your life's career basically in journalism. And now I have prepared a little list especially for you, meant to pick you up a little bit. So I said at the very beginning, you are one of a growing list of speakers on my channel who have suffered personal consequences for speaking out loud. And I have here my little list. So on top of my list is Tony Greenstein, yeah, who I interviewed recently, incredible person. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who told me, I interviewed him twice. There was the former chief of staff of Colin Powell's, who told me that the white powder that Colin Powell showed in this little glass tube at the UN was actually salt. But he also told me he sleeps with a gun under his pillow, and he was only half joking. Yeah. Professor Ilan Pappe, of course, amazing. Yeah, former CIA analyst Ray McGovern, who was, how shall I describe this, dragged and kicked out of a meeting where he dared to ask questions. They threw him on the ground, they broke his shoulder. Also really rough stuff. Next is Professor David Miller from the UK, who got fired from the University of Bristol. He has a court case, and he actually won a court case ruling that agreed with him that you cannot equate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. Then I have Professor Glenn Deason, who suffers today who suffers a massive smear campaign only because he has similar views like you in regards to the Ukraine war. Miko Peled, also his sister Nurit Peled, Professor Nurit Peled El Hanan, kicked out of the, well, it's more complex than that, but out of the university. I interviewed her husband, who he was invited twice to the Pope, and he told me he's exiled in his own country, right? Next online, Jean-Daniel Rouge, Swiss ambassador, where there was a Mossad operation to discredit him and kick him out of diplomatic service. Unbelievable. Avshalom Elitzur, you probably won't know him. He's an Israeli physicist. My interview with him blew up in Israel on 4 or 5 television channels. It was discussed in the Knesset, and they wanted to take away his teaching credentials. Former U.S. Marine Ken O'Keefe, yeah, USS Liberty survivor Phil Turney. Yeah, then I could go on, and I will add your name now to this list as one of those principled and rare persons who do what they think is right, yeah, who are on the right side of history. Or am I exaggerating here?
Well, this long list shows one thing, that propaganda, war propaganda, and censorship are both sides of the same medal. And the whole process is orchestrated by NATO and by NATO states and internationally rolled out. It's a process in all Western NATO countries to suppress dissident opinions. So that shows, well, the German Grundgesetz has an Article 5, there is no censorship at all. But this article doesn't work anymore. We are in a bubble of censorship right now to suppress public opinion and to destroy democracy. And that's the goal of the power elites. They want to destroy democracy. They want to press their own people in a new war against Russia because capitalism is in a crisis. And this is a Ponzi. All capitalism systems are Ponzi schemes, and they need new resources. They need Russian minerals and Russian resources to make their own capitalism going. And that's the background.
I would like to highlight to people that what you just said is not just a meaningless phrase, Ponzi scheme, because the fiat monetary system that well, basically the whole world at the moment have is basically exactly what you said. It's, if you define it and if you analyze it, it's absolutely true. It is a Ponzi scheme. They create money out of thin air. People don't realize this is factually true. I recommend everybody to look at the fractional reserve system. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Um, all financial systems in capitalism are about collateral. And you always need new collateral to keep the system going. That's the background. So you can give out new loans, but you need new collateral to underline those loans. And that's the background. And well, it's a financial capitalistic system, and it started long before the banking crisis when the state saved the banks on cost of the taxpayer. And that's the problem.
Before we now dive into some concrete things that happened in the recent past, I have 2 on my list here. I don't know if you are aware or if you had time to look into the European Council decision CSFP 2025-966. That basically, it's active now since May 20th, 2025, and it basically criminalizes dissent. It allows the European Council to put draconian punishment on European citizens, which include travel restrictions. There are already two concrete examples from German citizens who are not allowed anymore to enter their own home state. Yeah, they can freeze all of your assets, and the assets of your family, if they so please. And we have seen a similar thing already with the farmers' protests in Canada end of last year. And they can restrict your traveling. They can prevent you from working, etc., etc. So I don't know. Are you aware? Did you have a chance to look into this?
Yes, I did, because this is exactly what they did against Alina Lipp and Thomas Röper. And
Hmm.
the third report.
Those two I'm referring to actually. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah.
And both of these three are war reporters, as I am. And for bringing the reality into German apartments by TV or by news or internet, you were sanctioned. You were sanctioned. And you can imagine that some crazy bureaucrats in Brussels and in Berlin are trying to press out everybody and sanctioning everybody who wants to bring reality in their home countries. And this is completely illegal because the sanctions are not given by the United Nations or the United Nations Security Council as long ago the sanctions against the apartheid state of South Africa, which were decided by the United Nations. They are not given by the United Nations. These sanctions are just, uh, well, an illegal act. So it's against German law and it's against the German Grundgesetz. So this shows that the power elites want to terminate democracy all over Europe. We are in a time of abolishing democracy.
It circumvents any laws. You know, these kind
Yes.
of sanctions that persons can be put under circumvent any laws. There was no judge involved whatsoever, and you cannot contest it. That's the crazy part. You cannot go to court and say this is wrong or I don't agree or whatever. This option is just not there. That this is
Yes.
really going in the dictatorial, authoritarian direction fast forward.
Yeah, this shows that we don't live in a democracy anymore. This time is over. It is a new form of dictatorship by keeping a kind of democratic front, but nothing more.
And it comes from unelected officials like Kaya Kallas and Ursula von der Leyen.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Patrick, I have in front of me two key events that happened in the not too distant past, and I recently also discussed it with the former UK diplomat Ian Proud. He was stationed for a couple of years in Moscow in the UK embassy. Yeah? So first we had, of course, the attack on one part of the Russian nuclear triad, the nuclear bombers, where some sophisticated planners put drones in close proximity. They smuggled the drones in there and then attacked. And then not long after, we had, of course, the attacks in Iran, where the initial airport defenses were annihilated with a similar strategy, drones smuggled into the country. Now, I said to Ian, in my perspective, there are the CIA and especially MI6 fingerprints all over both cases, and he agreed. So I was wondering, what's your vision on this?
I'm sharing this opinion. These are the fingerprints of the CIA and especially of MI6. Especially in Ukraine, MI6 and CIA tried to implement, after the Second World War, a kind of stay behind organization, which worked especially in Western Ukraine, in Galicia, many years, until the mid-50s. A lot of those people were killed, but they also killed about 10,000 Russian people. So it was a secret civil war. And when I was in Donbass last year, I met a man in the city of Melitopol who was a civilian. He was a civilian. And he lost a leg by a bombing attack, by a bombing blast. So for this bombing blast, you have to bring in explosives and you have to bring in weapons. And you need exactly information about the ways of specific people and the territories you are working on. And this means the Americans and the British tried to set up another stay behind organization before the Russian attack against Ukraine in February 2022. And what we see right now is that this stay behind organization is, of course, successful. This is a typical way of destabilizing enemy countries. And this is the way the CIA and the MI6 are working.
And they have a long track record,
Yes,
unfortunately, a very
absolutely.
successful
Yeah.
track record of doing so. I would like to keep the keyword stay behind in the back of our minds. Yeah, but first, I would like to tell you something. I'm a behavior analyst, so I have like 20, 30 interviews with scientists in regards to human behavior. And one of them, and he's not a scientist, he's Alan Pease, who built in Australia, he built an empire based on nonverbal communication. Yeah, he's a public speaker, he has all kinds of stuff. Yeah. But he was in Crimea, coincidentally, he was in Crimea when this whole so-called invasion, whatever happened. Yeah. He told me on the interview he will never watch the news anymore because the news that were fed to us in the West was 180 degrees different than what he experienced because he saw fireworks and jubilation and festivity, yeah. While here in the West we thought that was a hostile takeover and there was a civil war, but none of that was true, of course. Yeah.
Yes, that's the same experience I made. And there are for that cultural reasons, political reasons, and militarily reasons, and economic reasons as well. So the first point are the cultural reasons. Ukraine has not a unique cultural identity. It is a mixed up state in terms of culture, a mixed up state. You have Hungarian influences, Romanian influences, Austrian influences, Polish influences, Jewish influences. And on the eastern part of the country, you have Russian influences. A lot of people are feeling as a part of the Russian culture. That's the first point. And in trying to press out the Russian language, those people feel suppressed. That's one point. And the second one is after the independence in 1991, the economy of the Ukraine came down slowly, step by step. A sign for that is in the beginning in 1991, Ukraine had 52 million inhabitants. Today we arrived on a level of, let me say, 25 to 28 million inhabitants. So the country lost half of its population and the largest part before the beginning of the second part of the war. So something must be wrong in that country. And what went wrong is the oligarchs enriched themselves and took the money out of the country, and nothing else was left. So, who wanted to make a fortune in Ukraine had to go elsewhere as a foreign worker in Poland, in Germany, in the United Kingdom, or elsewhere, as drivers, workers, prostitutes, anything else, or had to go into smuggling, mostly of cigarettes, or had to go to the militias because they are paying very well. And at the same time, during the leadership of Putin, the Russian economy came up step by step. And on both sides, in Russia and in Ukraine, are a lot of border crossing um, relationships, and relatives. So people could see in their own families that on the Russian side, welfare is growing, and on the Ukraine side, welfare is declining. So they want to go to Russia. It's very clear. And the third point is, after the coup of the Maidan, who was orchestrated by the United States with the help of European countries, with at least 100 deaths and killed people, who were always killed by right-wingers and by hired mercenaries. A wave of violence rolled through the country against the Russian population, and a civil war started with more than 10,000 killed people, mostly civilians, and most of them on the side of the separatist movement and the separatist republics in the eastern part of the country. And, well, I'm living in Berlin. When I would have been under fire for 8 years, let me say, by the Bundeswehr from Potsdam, I probably would say, what, what's up with those Germans? Let's do our thing with the Polish guys. They're also good men. So, and so the West produced the trouble he's in right now. And he produced the reason for the Ukraine war by itself. It was the West who did that. And, well, we have the cultural reasons, we have the economic reasons, and we have the political and military reasons. So those people want to belong to Russia. And this was the result of the referenda, which are in the West named fake referenda, because they don't want to understand what's happening on the ground. They don't want to understand what's happening on the ground, because everything what you can hear and see in eastern Ukraine shows the involvement of NATO and the West.
You just said Maidan 2014, yeah. So I interviewed Professor Ivan Kachanovsky, who wrote his PhD on what happened on that specific day. And I have heard Jeffrey Sachs mentioning Ivan, John Mearsheimer mentioned Ivan. So he has some kind of credibility. Yeah? He also interviewed those snipers who shot on both sides. They shot with full conscience on both the police and the spectators. And he has a radio transcript where they, prior to this so-called revolution, discussed how many dead people would we need in order to make the West and the US care. And the number was about 100. How many people did they kill? More or less 100 on that day. I mean, it's just too crazy for words. So this is absolutely right. That was instigated by people by the West, but key actors were, of course, Victoria Nuland with her Fuck the EU statement that was leaked, and John McCain. Both were on site. Now, I wonder, by this insurrection at the 6th of January in Washington, if we would have high-level functionaries from Russia being in the crowd and you know, giving them drive to enter the building, how that would have been seen, you know, in the American press. But if we, the West, do it in Ukraine, it's just not discussed about.
Absolutely. This was more than a color revolution. This was a coup d'etat, completely. And not only American diplomats and American billionaires like George Soros were involved, but also diplomats and representatives of the European Union, because this radio tape you mentioned involved the voices of European diplomats. And Ukraine right-wingers asked, Ukraine militants asked, how many assassinations do we need to force the European Union and European states to press the democratically elected President Yanukovych, out of office? And those European diplomats told the Ukraine right-wingers, I think about 100. And this is exactly the number the right-wingers shot dead. So it's not a color revolution, it's more. It's completely orchestrated by the West, by NATO states, led by the United States with the help of European diplomats and European snipers. Snipers were involved not only from Galicia, but we saw sniper groups from Galicia, 4 sniper groups from Georgia, at least 1 sniper group of Poland, and 1 sniper group of Lithuania. You can read that in the book of Ivan Kachanovsky you mentioned. Everything is in it. So the show is proven. And our leaders in Europe today are personally responsible for that what happened. So normally they had to step back, but they don't want to step back. And this is the main reason why they are pressing their own people deeper and deeper in the Ukraine war.
Because you said our own people are responsible. For me, one person sticks out, and that's, of course, the then UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, because 6 weeks after the war, this war could already have been stopped. And we know that because Putin presented the agreements slash contracts with the signatures of the Ukrainian negotiation team. And then the Americans sent in Boris Johnson. That was the meeting that they had in Istanbul. And then they sent Boris Johnson to Kiev, and basically he said, no, 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 you're not gonna stop fighting. You will fight till the last Ukrainian. Now I'm putting the words that those were not Boris Johnson's words, but I think Joe Biden said it. You will fight till the last Ukrainian. So again, people have to realize we have today 1 million, and again, I also cross-reference this number with Ian Proud, yeah. So it's generally accepted now that we have 1 million dead or wounded in Ukraine alone, right? These could have been prevented already 6 weeks after the outbreak of this crisis. But thanks to us, the West, specifically Boris Johnson or whoever sent him there, we are in the quagmire that we are seeing today with no end in sight.
Well, and the complete Western mainstream press is lying about this process voluntarily and knowingly. And every single participant of the peace process in Belarus and Istanbul told in public that there were peace negotiations, successful peace negotiations. And we have at least 2 different sources concerning the role of Boris Johnson. We have sources in Ukraine, Ukraine's Pravda, And we have two sources in the United Kingdom, the Times and the Guardian. And they both, in the background, have two different sources. So this is a proof. This is a proof. But the press is lying about that because they are aligning completely with NATO and the war could be over. So the CIA, according to the CIA numbers, we have 1.5 million killed people in Ukraine, complete on both sides. And we have, and most of them on the Ukraine side, because the Russians are superior in artillery, drones, and missiles. And this is a war fought by drones, artillery, and missiles. That's the point. And so I think we have more than 1 million casualties on the Ukraine side. And I estimate the Russian casualties, I often talk to Russian people as well, on about 150 to 180,000 killed people on both sides. So you can't see the war in great cities, in big cities like St. Petersburg or Moscow, but in the outskirts, in the villages, in the poor territories and regions like Dagestan or Karelia, you can see the graves over there. And Ukraine, on the western side, on the government side, is full of graves today. It's a single graveyard. But, well, the people on the ground want peace. I talk to many people on the ground, except the right wingers and the organized Nazi organizations. They don't want peace, but their survival depends on the war. But the normal people want peace on both sides of the front line. It's incredible. When I was in Donbass last year, I met a company of,
Sorry, before you start, just
yeah.
out of personal interest, how did you get there in the first place? I mean, it's not so that you just can jump on a plane and you land there. How did you get there?
So my first visit was on the western side of Ukraine, and I have friends over there who are farmers. They brought me in touch to a lot of people. And we planned to go to Donbass in the upcoming year, but it was impossible because the war began. The second part of the war began. And I tried to find another partner, and we made that trip over the Russian side. So we drove by car to Kaliningrad, we took a plane to Moscow, we took a train to Rostov-na-Donu. Then we tried to find a private taxi to the frontier to Donbass. We crossed the border with the poll watchers, and on the other side, we organized a driver of our own. This was the way to get in. And
A lot of trust required in people who you don't really know, huh?
no, um, I told you that I have sources in Russia.
Okay.
And well, the way of doing this is to ask those old sources, what can I do? Can you
Mm.
help? Do you know somebody who's over there? And then we were sent to somebody with warm regards from this guy or that guy. And there were phone calls were made, emails were sent, and messages were sent out. You can trust those guys, so help them.
Mm.
And that's the way of doing.
Mm. And
Um,
you did this on your own, right? You did not do this for a large international news organization or
no,
whatever. You did this on your own, right?
no, yes, I did it on my own and I paid everything. Um, I paid
Means
everything.
there's no plan B. There is no organization who can help you should something go wrong. There is no insurance whatsoever, etc., etc. So people don't realize what this actually entails, right?
Yes, that's right. But a big publisher, a newspaper or something, cannot help on the ground. So I have my own support people. I have my own. It's the only way of doing that. I know Russian people, and they know somebody at the military. And when I was in Moscow, I talked to people who had influence in the Donbass, who had links to the Donbass, and I talked to them. So I presented my books. We discussed what what we can do, what's possible, what's not. And so you often get the answer, okay, let's see. If possible, you will get a phone call. And you don't know what will happen. But during my second visit, I was at the so-called information ministry, just to say I'm here. And I met a representative of this ministry, and he told me, yeah, we know you very well. We know you wrote a book. And well, they are well informed. They are well informed. And my way of doing this is you need a official level, a official structure, and an unofficial structure, a more covered structure. And the official structure is for getting accreditations, military permissions, visa, hotels, all that, tickets. And the unofficial string of investigation is people I know. And the official side does not know who I know elsewhere. So I have a
I
private.
would like to stay. I would like to stay a little bit in Donbass, yeah, but out of curiosity again, did you have any issues coming back to Germany
Sorry?
or afterwards? Did you have any issues coming back to Germany or any consequences as a result of this trip?
For me, or
Yeah,
so German public, the German public is split up. So,
I meant more from the government, you know, government.
well, I'm still under pressure of the government. And my shelter is that I'm well known in Germany and internationally today. But they try to find something to imprison me. They try to find something, but they did not so far. But I'm sure that I'm blackmailed, and I'm sure that I'm under surveillance always, and that they are trying to find something. They have a file. The German secret services have a file on me. Um, and I can tell that because I want them to know that I know that. I could that find out. And so what I can say is I was on the ground and I'm telling the truth. So I'm aware that the reporter can only look to the next house or to the next forest. He does not see what is behind the house or behind the forest. So you need sources who were there. And you have to compare everything you found out with historic studies, scientific studies, with other sources. You have to compare the sources. And that's my result. So that's the way I'm working. It's not only my view. Many historians found out the same results. And I'm on the level of the scientific investigations. But the press is not. The mainstream press is not. Because the main job of the mainstream press is lying by leaving out.
I can give you an example from the BBC. First of all, I interviewed someone so on the record from the BBC, but I know two independent BBC journalists in different parts of the world, and they told me if we would report the truth, we would be fired.
Yes,
It's that black and white.
yes,
I'm,
yes.
I'm not sure if that matches your experience.
Um, it matches my experience, and the same experience made a colleague of the public broadcaster ZDF in Germany. He reported correctly from Mariupol, he covered correctly, and then he was taken out of the job. So that shows the unique role of the propaganda. The propaganda of NATO is dominating the public sphere, and especially the public broadcasters.
Hmm. Because you just said NATO, are you aware of NATO's cognitive warfare program, which has been implemented in 2022?
Yes, I'm aware of that, and I know that years ago, more than 27,000 people worked in the Pentagon only on public relation matters. I'm talking about
Public relation, yeah.
only public relation of the Pentagon,
Yeah.
not the
Mhm.
whole United States government, not the whole NATO, not the single NATO states. We're doing much more. And, well, the main goal of cognitive warfare of NATO is to take away the possibility to think on your own. They are trying to implement hate, prejudices, ressentiments, and to close the doors of hate and emotions before in front of the brain. You don't think anymore. That's the main point. And now we are completely in the Western countries in a state of the loss of reality. And in war times, this is very dangerous because for winning a war, you must exactly know what the enemy wants and what the enemy will do. What are the next steps of the other side? Well, this is the game. It's like a chessboard. And the West does not know how to play this game. He's believing his own propaganda. And this led to mistakes. And what we're doing right now are a lot of mistakes. And the main mistake is we underestimated the Russian military power. And we underestimated the way of Russian strategic thinking. Many Western officers in military and in the Bundeswehr, somewhere else, cannot understand the way of warfare on the Russian side. I will give you an example. The Russian military does not conquer territories because they have enough territory. It's the largest country of the world. The strategy is based on using territory to destroy the enemy. This is a different thing. The Western press is writing all the time 3.5 years. So the Russian does not come forward in eastern Ukraine. The background is they don't want to come forward. They want to destroy the Ukrainian troops. This is the process of what Moscow said, denazification. They are killing all the Nazi militias, what they did in Mariupol as well. And that's the goal. Western Ukraine and the coup government and the Nazi orchestrated government of Zelensky is bleeding out. And then NATO has to make a decision to stop the war and to come to the negotiation table for cutting a deal, or as the British did 125 years ago, the NATO must give the order, Germans to the front, then the Germans will be the next to die at the front line. This is something German people don't realize because the propaganda bubble is closed up. We are living in a propaganda sphere. We are living in a sphere of cognitive warfare. And you can divide the war in three levels. The first level is, well, the military process at the front line. The second is the economic warfare, sanctions, and all that. And, well, the West is losing this warfare. And the third warfare is the ideological warfare, the cognitive warfare. And this is a warfare against the people in the Western countries. But because nobody in Latin America, and South America, in the Americas, nobody in Asia, nobody in Africa is believing this NATO shit. They don't believe that because of the double standards of the West. Look into Gaza or something. So the West is completely lost his moral authority completely. Every taxi cabbie, every taxi driver in Colombo, Sri Lanka, can explain this war in a better way as German intellectuals. That's the point. It's completely crazy because they don't want to understand. It's a question of willing. They are making their money by not understanding what they have to explain. So they are spreading lies, NATO lies. NATO lost the war, and now we have to make a decision to bring in German troops. So we'll see. And this is what will happen if German people refuses to resist against the warmongers.
Very briefly, cognitive warfare, because I would like to give the viewers just a glimpse. Yeah, so I think it's called the sixth battlefield. So we have a battlefield on land, water, in the air, in the space, in the cyberspace, and now the sixth one is in your brain. People do not understand cognitive warfare is using, and I'm saying this as an academically trained behavior analyst, cognitive warfare is using sophisticated psychological mechanisms and methods to guide mass population sentiments, yeah, to encapsulate. Yeah. And it's a massive program. It started in 2022. It's NATO-wide, means the whole Western world. And it has one aim, to get everybody in line for the coming wars, plural, especially with Russia, but more and more also in regards to China. That's the next big thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, I would like to get your opinion on one specific thing. So, and I make it a little bit black and white, I'm aware. Yeah. So in my point of view, America, and again, I have interviewed Jeffrey Sachs, Noam Chomsky, a number of other academics who told me the same thing. The war in Ukraine was instigated consciously by the US. Now we have a very interesting situation. So the US pulls back because they're now in full on preparation for war with China, which leaves the Europeans. And while the Europeans, I can remember Merkel and Hollande were prudent in regards to Ukraine at the beginning, now it's the other way around. Now the US is prudent while they're pulling out, and suddenly we have a German Chancellor Merz and the former Dutch PM Rutte, which is now NATO's General Secretary, which I've heard speaking the most hawkish and not to say idiotic, pardon my French, things when it comes to the war in Ukraine, right? So where is this? I do not understand why suddenly Europe, not a specific country, but Europe is so hell-bent on continuing, on dragging out this mass slaughter in Ukraine. I don't get it.
Mm. So one thing is very clear. Ukraine war is a war of the United States and their vessels.
It was. I fully agree. But now the US
It
pulls
is
back.
still a war of the United States and their vessels against the Russian Federation on Ukraine's soil. Ukraine people will be brought to the slaughterhouse. And the main tool is Germany and the German people, and they don't know that. And what Trump is doing right now, he don't stop the war. He cannot stop the war. except he wants to uh, fulfill and accept the Russian demands. This is the only way to stop the war. What Trump is doing, he will Europeanize the war.
Delegate. Yeah,
Yes, he wants to delegate the war. I think the transatlantic split is a myth. It's just a kind of job sharing. Europeans should do the job in Ukraine, and the Americans will do their job against China and in the Middle East and elsewhere. So Trump got all he wanted to get 5% of the GDP in
which is
military expense.
crazy.
It's
Which is
completely crazy.
crazy.
It's completely crazy, which means social cuts all over the map, all over Europe. And if the Europeans want to fight this war, to go on fighting, let them do that. It's good for the United States. They can sell us weapons. And this is
Exactly.
a way of exploitation. The European taxpayer, the money will be taken from social spending and education and university
Retirement
and
funds.
infrastructure
Yeah,
and will pass to the military industrial complex of the United States.
yeah,
It's a form of exploitation, nothing
yeah.
else. And people don't want
It's
to
the
do that.
greatest. It's
This
the
is
great.
the main level of this war is not only against Russia, it is a class war against the people in Europe. And they don't understand that. They will want to understand that. It's a class war.
This this 5% GDP is the greatest wealth transfer in a generation. This is what
Yes,
people do not understand, because this is actual money feeding American debt. This is what it is. Because
yes,
where does it go to? America. This
yes.
money goes 100% to America.
I agree totally. That's the point. And so this is a kind of job sharing. The transatlantic split is, from my point of view, a myth. So, and we have to have a glimpse on our European elites. And I think um, the decisive year was 2003, when the second Iraq war started. And the German Chancellor Schröder, the Russian President Putin, and the French President Chirac refused to join this illegal war against Iraq. And this caused discussions in Washington. What to do with the next generation of European elites. We have to spend more money, and we have to keep an eye on the question how to align the European elites to the wishes of Washington. And you can do that by um, inviting students, inviting to PhD courses, to debates, to travelings around the United States by transatlantic organizations like the Atlantic Brücke or German Marshall Fund, or by funding via oligarchs like George Soros and his Renaissance foundations and all that. So the question is how to involve European elites in American thinking, war planning, and strategy. And this worked. And now we have a class of a European elite, and especially a German elite, who wants to be loved by the Americans and not by their own citizens. These elites agree to destroy their own countries by a clap on their shoulder by the Washington elites. And what we see is European elites are destroying Europe right now. And on a psychological level, I think these elites have a kind of Nero syndrome. They are burning the whole world down, and especially Europe, and they are happy looking into the flames. So it's a transatlantic corrupted elite. But it's a sign of decline that German people, French people, Swedish people, Finnish people don't have the power and the courage to send those elites out of office and to the garbage can of history.
One key event that for me symbolizes exactly what you said, this complete disregard for their own people, is of course the attack on the Nord Stream pipelines. Now, before I ask you who do you think did it, I mean, I covered this, I talked about this with Jeffrey Sachs and some other people. The effects of the loss of this cheap gas, not only for Germany but also for Europe, is significant. So people speak about the deindustrialization of Germany, right? German people already feel it, and that comes now on top of these 900 billion that Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas have earmarked for the war in Ukraine. Yeah? But the very fact that I still see President Biden with Schulz next to him, where this female Reuters journalist was really puzzled when Joe Biden said to her, I promise you, we will do it. You know, we will ensure that Nord Stream will be interrupted. Yeah? And she was so puzzled that she said, but Mr. President, how will you do that? Yeah. And Scholz stood next to her, next to Biden, and only said, and I'm paraphrasing here, yeah, we do everything in cooperation. Yeah. So again, I covered this. I had a couple of interviews on this topic. It's clear that the Americans, it doesn't matter who actually was down there. And maybe one last thing. I interviewed Eric Anderson. Yeah, he's a former Boeing engineer who has now twice funded a private expedition down to the very spot where those pipelines were blown up, and he came up with videos. And guess what he found? You cannot make this up. And I have the video. I can actually share it. A U.S. Navy diver boot directly next to the pipelines. Now, I'm not saying that this diver boot comes from the actual attacks. Yeah. But it means someone wearing U.S. Navy diver boots was definitely down there. Let's not forget that the Swedish Marine took everything out. They removed all the evidence. Yeah. So, seeing the massive impact also the economic impact this had on Germany and will have the next 2-3 generations probably. Yeah. Coming back to what you said, the elite has absolute no regard for their own population. And now I'm coming to you with the question, who do you think blew up Nord Stream?
Well, the former US President Biden announced that America, the United States, will destroy the pipeline. And according to the famous journalist Seymour Hersh,
which is also completely disowned, disrespected. He had to go through the mud. Yeah, he can no longer publish except on Substack. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah.
And well, this is something he's making very well. And you have to keep in mind, he never made a mistake in his investigation because he has the best sources, high-level sources. Everybody is coming to Seymour Hersh to tell him stories because, he's every information you have given to him is absolutely safe.
Yeah.
And so,
is it fair? Sorry, is it fair to say he's the best-known investigative journalist in America?
I would say so. Yes, I would say so.
Yeah.
And I have to say, this is not a case of sanctions or a form of sanctions. This is a case of illegal warfare against a NATO partner, which means, well, a German government that is not a puppet of the United States would have to leave NATO at once, because we cannot be in a treaty or in a partnership, in a military partnership with a so-called partner who is destroying our infrastructure. This does not work.
Critical
Critical
infrastructure.
infrastructure,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
So, and without Russian gas and oil and without Russian minerals, the German economy is not competitive. So, this is the end of the German economy. And, well, you mentioned the deindustrialization, which we can see everywhere right now. And the result will be Europe as a whole will become the backyard of the United States and at the same time the backyard of Russia as well. Because Russia is turning around and made a lot of investments to come closer to Asia economically, in questions of transport, all over the map, with pipelines, highways, tracks. You can see that. And what Tsar Peter made with the foundation of St. Petersburg in the year 1703 will now come to an end for the next 200 or 300 years. And European destroyed itself, or, well, European will be destroyed by its own elites, but the European people don't present any form of resistance. And such things are not only caused by those who make the wrong decisions, they are also caused by those who don't resist the
And who
wrong.
stay silent.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
Yes, and we have now exactly the situation that Brzezinski also warned in 1997, I believe it was, in the Grand Chessboard, yeah, where he said we should try to avoid at all costs to drive Russia in the arms of the. Although he said, he wrote, it's unlikely, but he said we should avoid at all costs to drive Russia in the hands of China and Iran. He explicitly mentioned those three countries, exactly what we see right now. And U.S. Ambassador Charles Freeman told me they were even more stupid than that. They put
yes,
North Korea into the game, a nuclear armed North Korea,
yes,
right? So we are going completely in the wrong direction.
absolutely, absolutely. And, well, Russia and China are getting closer and closer together. I remember the visit of the Chinese foreign minister at Kaja Kallas in Europe. And he told Miss Callas that China has no interest that Russia is losing the Ukraine war. And
Yeah,
that
that was
means,
recent. That was
yes,
recent. Yeah.
recent. And that means that China has an interest that Russia will win this war. And so China, Beijing, will support Moscow. And every approach to separate both will be failing. And that means what the European leaders do right now is they are pressing their own countries into destruction. That's very clear. And they go on and they go on and they go on with it.
Let's continue on this train of thought. So there might be two scenarios. So and pure coincidence, I'm preparing a report for my next week's Substack, looking at how far the US already advanced in its preparation to have war with China. And I'm telling you, I'm really concerned. I did not know that was already that advanced. There, yeah. So let's say for whatever reason something happens there in the South China Sea, either by intent, maybe by accident. It doesn't need to be that China starts a full-blown invasion on Taiwan. Yeah, but with all the military, the U.S. military in the South China Sea, some things can happen. Yeah, so if something happens there, whatever it is, do you see Moscow intervening on the side of China? That's the first part of the question. And I do know it's not a good idea to ask compound questions, but they're related. And if we reverse this, if something happens, and it doesn't look like it right now because Russia is winning, yeah. But if something happens in Ukraine that might, um, have some catastrophic effects on the Russians, would China interfere on the side of Russia? So in each scenario, I would like to have your opinion.
I don't think so. From the Beijing perspective, Russia is a northern bloc against NATO and Western countries and US influence. And Russia is a mineral store as well. That's enough. And from the Russian perspective, they are involved in Ukraine. They won't intervene with troops in Asia. They won't do that. But this is enough. China is strong enough, and Russia is strong enough. Both are strong enough to win those wars. What CIA and MI6 and Western countries are trying to do is to bring countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and so on, and on their side. And both Russia and China will increase pressure on those countries. This is my expectation. So what we see is worldwide from a geopolitical point of view. So international law is completely lost.
It's dead. It's
It's
dead,
dead.
absolutely.
So we are on a crime scene and everybody's killing everybody. And now we are cutting claims. And the American claim is the Americas, Cuba. They are increasing pressure on Cuba, Greenland, Europe. And from a Beijing point of view, their claim is with Russia, the South Pacific area, and the Middle East till Iran. And this is the critical area, the Middle East. And so we will see what happened. They are cutting claims right now. And on the periphery of the empires, you will have fightings and struggles and everything like that. So the Western countries made very clear that they won't accept their decline in a peaceful way. They said they want to bring in military forces. So we are facing a century of new wars, and we will see a lot of blood. Probably a nuclear war in Europe, for example, or in the Middle East. It was very close in the Israeli-Iran war. So Pakistan told the Israelis, if you bring in nuclear weapons, missiles, we will do the same.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely
well,
stunning. Yeah.
and this is very clear. Islamabad discussed that in advance with Beijing. This is the way of doing. And we are very, very close to nuclear wars in Europe as well. So our Chancellor Merz, the time of diplomacy ran out. What is that?
Mm.
We are, well,
That was the guy who said the Israelis do our Drecksarbeit. I don't even
Yes.
know if there is a corresponding word that captures this adequately in English. It's dirty work is not the right word because dirty word is a too nice an expression for what the German chancellor there said, Drecksarbeit. It's unbelievable, really.
Hmm. Hmm. And well, Russia is the strongest nuclear power on Earth. And every nuclear power coming under pressure will use the nuclear bomb. That's very clear. And well, I talked to the Russian ambassador, Nechayev, right here in Berlin. It was a public discussion, and he said, when Russia comes under pressure, we will fight with all means. And that's very clear. They will use nuclear for a diplomat. It's very clear.
It's a
And
kind of Russian Samsung options like the Israelis publicly propagate.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's the point. And so Germans don't want to know, so they're going into the destruction of their own country.
Mm. What people don't realize is that the strategic targets have shifted. Yes, any adversary would first try to strike the other enemies, also the enemy's rocket launchers. Yeah, but second on the list, what most people don't realize is today data centers. Well, why is that? Our communication wouldn't be possible right now without data centers. You know, people think, yeah, everything is in the cloud. The cloud does not exist. They're all massive, massive server farms, physical server farms that take the energy of cities. So these massive data centers, who are now the backbone of our information technology, and more the drivers for our AI that we are more and more rely upon, inclusive the military, you know, they're relying on AI. This will be gone in a flash, virtually speaking, not necessary to a direct hit. But I can tell you one thing: chips do not react well to any kind of radiation, right? So when we talk about nuclear strikes, you and me probably, we are not talking about massive bombs like in Hiroshima, but on so-called strategic bombs, you know, the smaller ones, which only destroy a city or two. Yeah, this is what we are looking at in Europe. I think you're absolutely right.
So I'm a bit frustrated about the discussion in Germany. I have to say that. Um, and I have to say we should finish our
Yeah.
discussion because I cannot sit anymore
Yes.
because of
Okay. Okay.
I can
Yes, I understand. So for the benefit, because then I don't have to cut it out. Yeah, for the benefit of our viewer, you not only took your time on a Saturday morning, which I greatly appreciate, but you had a surgery this week. Yeah. So you're basically under pain. You took painkillers, and nevertheless, you took the time to sit down with me for an interview. Really appreciate, Patrick. So let's leave it at that. It was a fascinating discussion. I will not promise yet that you don't hear from me again. On the contrary, probably. Yeah. But for today, I really thank you for your time.
I hope so. Thanks very much.